So basically today we're talking about MA programs. We'll talk at the end about how PhD programs are different, but we tend to do that workshop in the fall because it's an earlier set of deadlines. So it's a little bit of a different process. So what is an MA program? So first of all, this is what you get at the end. It looks different from your undergrad garb. You've got a hood, but that's obviously not the only difference. So it is different from undergrad. We're really not just taking more classes just to learn things. It's expected to be a little bit more of a directed, focused, applying for an early entry program at UNC Charlotte. There's some pluses and minuses to that we can talk about. So we do have students who do independent studies, independent research projects, but it can be really a challenging process, and so we really encourage students, if they can, to work with faculty members' projects because that means things can go a little more quickly. So I have a couple students now who are working with me on food access issues in Charlotte, and also are working with me on another one on farming, and so that becomes a way that they can use my networks and my resources to do that. But it is a specific topic. And no matter what your topic is, you'll learn research skills that can be applied in a variety of different topics. So even if you do one thing for your master's, you can do something else for your PhD. You can go into a different field. It's really focused on that set of skills and knowledge that you get as a master's student and just the ability to do independent work that allows you to do that. So it's independent that you're working on your own, but you may be working on someone else's project. And then of course it's supported by coursework. So you're not just doing research, you're also learning a bit more about anthropology, a lot more theory, a lot more discussion-oriented classes, a lot more thinking through and reflecting, and it's kind of like senior seminar and theory kind of rolled into a super seminar with a little bit of a lot of extra work in there. So you might ask yourself, why should I get a master's degree? What is it good for? Is it just another fancy thing to have on your wall? There's a couple things you can do. So we have 2 tracks for our MA. One is for those interested in non-academic careers. So say you want to work outside of college, which most of you will, what are you going to be able to do? What kinds of jobs can you get? So a master's degree in applied anthropology, for example, really focuses on how you can start to build networks with people outside of the university, how to understand what you're going to be going into, what kinds of things you want to learn before you get there. So here's an example of a book that I teach in my applied class, Doing Anthropology and Consumer Research. So if you're interested in marketing and business, there's a lot of anthropologists doing this work that gets to deeper issues of meaning and interpretation, and even ethnography, and thinking about how to understand consumers or business more generally. So I use this, it's very business oriented, but it gives you really good examples of what anthropologists do in the field, because you don't often see that as business anthropologists. Some of you may have heard of cultural resources management. This is an example from New York City where they discovered an African graveyard where they were building financial buildings. So they brought in archaeologists to figure this stuff out, right? What's happening? Is this interesting? What should we save? How should we save it? They still built the building, but they were able to preserve some of the space and some of the artifacts in ways that were respectful to the cultures and expectations there. So I think 50% or something like that of archaeologists work in cultural resources management. Work for government, work for other agencies or other private companies doing this kind of work. And it's basically a dig to preserve and figure out what's there before they build a highway or whatever it is. And the last one I'll talk about just briefly, this is Paul Farmer, who's a medical anthropologist, and this is one of his more recent books, To Repair the World. He works in medicine and international development. So how do we understand what other people, other countries are looking for? Anthropologists have a unique skill set in talking to people, identifying, understanding what kinds of things organizations can provide. In a lot of places, and Paul Farmer is an example of this, critiquing the general approach and how to make it better. How do we improve the kinds of services that are being provided both here and around the world? So those are just several examples. There's a lot more if you want to talk or take applied anthropology to understand kind of what's going on. Yeah, a master's is really well situated for doing kind of professional work in a variety of fields. Design work, marketing, nonprofits, trying to think there's no end to it. We've got students in almost every field at this point. So an anthropology degree is useful for that. And a master's gives you that independent research. So for doing individual courses in cultural resources management or running studies or focus groups, things like that, or working in development agencies, it gives you that extra set of experiences and knowledge that can help you with that. So the other reason to get an MA is because you're thinking about going for a PhD. So some PhD programs actually prefer that you come in with a master's degree. Some don't. So if you're interested in this, look and see what the program does. My PhD program didn't require it. Chapel Hill doesn't require it, but I've heard
individual faculty prefer it.
Yeah, so it does, again, it's that experience of doing a project. It's kind of a mini PhD. It allows you to see if this is what you want to spend 8 years of your life on, because a PhD program is still, I think, an average of 8 years. It feels like 18. Not 18. But, and so it gives you experience, it gives you good references, and it may actually you know, provide you a stronger position when you're applying for those positions. And applying for funding, which is a big issue for PhD programs. If you're going to spend 8 years doing something, someone should pay you, right? So trying to get funding is a key thing there. But obviously, if you're doing a PhD program, your goal may be to teach. One word of caution, there aren't that many teaching positions available. I don't know if you've heard that rumor, but it is more and more competitive. There's more and more PhD students coming out and fewer positions. So if you're good at math, that tells you it's difficult. So I always tell my students, I suggest that they go into this, if they want to go and get a PhD, to think about a PhD as a route both to academia and to doing something more applied or at least outside of academia, and to really keep those both in mind as you go through. So you want to get an MA now, you're still in the room, that's good. So what makes you a good candidate? Right? So what makes someone a good master's candidate? Do you want to come up and help with this?
If you guys are in a 4-field anthropology degree, I think all of you are majors. And that's good if you're applying to a master's in anthropology, because you'll have taken a lot of the courses that we will build upon down the road. But you're not limited to an anthropology degree, and you're not limited to whatever subfield you've concentrated in here. I know a lot of you guys went to Florida with Dr. Light, for instance, and I've seen some of you in some osteology classes and stuff. But just because you've taken those classes doesn't mean that's what you have to do in a master's program. So having a broad base makes you a good candidate.
And when we're looking at applicants, if you haven't had an anthropology class, that's a red flag because you may not know what anthropology is. Right. So we often encourage you to take a class or two before you apply, and since you're all majors, you're good. We do get candidates who have a strong background in archaeology and want to come into sociocultural or vice versa, and so we don't have an issue with that as long as you can really articulate, we'll talk about that in a minute, why your interest is now in archaeology and not just on board with sociocultural. It's time to go dig, right? So you kind of have to think through these things, and Sarah will talk about that as the statement. But definitely kind of having exposure to anthropology makes you, it's a good starting place.
And if you do think you have a specific interest, having taken some classes or a field school or done an internship in that subdiscipline is a good idea too. Like if you already know, like, I really enjoyed this field school in Florida, so I want to do primatology, go ahead and take a primate behaviors class in undergrad, so that when you apply you can say, yeah, not only have I done a field school, I took the classes and I'm definitely interested in this.
And one of the things that gets to is that you're not just telling us that you have a lot of experiences and you're not doing these things to check boxes, you love it. This is what you want to do. And so you, as a good candidate, or someone who, this is what you can't imagine doing anything else in the future, right? So you have this passion for learning more, for really doing this independent research in this area, and that comes through not just in that you checked the boxes, but that you did it with very much an interest. So we've seen some applicants who have attended a field school and then they helped run the field school. And that really shows that they're not just taking responsibility, but they have a deep enough interest that they've gotten someone's attention and have shown responsibility and the ability to work independently. So it's that kind of progress through interest to passion that I think comes through in a lot of the applicants that we think are outstanding.
This might be, looking at your next slide, this might be what we're about to talk about next. But I would say also in terms of setting yourself up as a good candidate would be, don't just apply randomly. Yes, we have a master's program here and we'd love to see all of you in it, but don't just apply here because you're here already and because we've said that we'd love to see you here. Apply somewhere that actually has somebody who does what you want to do, or at least someone kind of close. Because you're going to be a stronger candidate. They're going to be more interested in taking you on as a student if you can speak to what they're interested in, right? We're all, at the end of the day, a little bit selfish, and we want to work with people who like what we like.
We're fighting for students now.
Right.
And so I think that just speaks to knowing what you want to do. We do get occasionally people who write these statements of purpose that say, I just want to study more anthropology. And we can't tell what subfield they want to work in. And not knowing is an issue, right? If you're going to come and spend 2 years of your life, which actually isn't that long, but we'll talk about that in a minute, it's 2 years of your life, you should know kind of what you want to get out of it. So it's not just, I love archaeology, I just want to dig more, I want to take more classes. It's, I see this as a stepping stone to something else, and this is a particular thing I want to study while I'm in grad school. So we've just reviewed all these candidates for next year, so it's all fresh in our mind. And you know, most of our students make great candidates. That's why we have the early entry program. But we want to kind of make sure that you're competitive other places. We'd rather you go other places. You're going to get different experiences. If this is the right program for you, great. But there's probably another program out there that may be better suited. So thinking about that is where we go with the timeline. So if you're applying, there's a couple things to do. So you see, apply is actually the end of this arrow, which has some advantages, but it means that right now, talk with faculty. Start today. Right? There's 3 of us in the room. You can chat us up and talk to us about what's going on. And this is about what your interests are. What do you want to do? What do you want to get out of life? What are your goals? And having those kind of conversations with faculty means that they can help advise you on where you might start looking, what programs. We know colleagues all over the country, all over the world. Maybe we know someone who's doing exactly what you want to do. That's a great connection. So, use us. Just make sure that, you come talk to us, volunteer or intern, and Alan will talk in a little bit about his internship opportunities. Field schools, other research experiences, show us you want to do this, right? You can talk all you want, but if you have some experience doing research, I make my students do it in my classes, you know if you like it or not, and that's helpful, right? We want to know that you're invested and that you really enjoy this. So that's talking with faculty. Most programs require the GRE. We are actually switching to not require the GRE, and for early entry it's not required anyway. But you may need to take the GRE, so that's something to schedule relatively early so you can retake it if it's low. I encourage you to kind of look at a book. I have a GRE book. I have to say, the logic section is hard. It's counterintuitive to some extent. So look at a book, at a GRE book at least before you do it. The classes are expensive, but I think you can get a lot out of the books.
I just did an online review, but
yeah, there's different ways to kind of just see what you're going to see on the GRE, and that's before it changed to the writing section, and it's all different now. But put this in your schedule, right? When are you going to take the GRE if the programs you're interested in require it?
I would also say, sorry, about the GRE, most programs, unlike undergrad, most master's programs and PhD programs don't list on their website what their average GRE score is.
So part of this, as I said, some require the GRE, some don't. Find out about the program. So this is Google. You guys are all familiar with Google. You can use Google. Find a program around, usually the US, but abroad as well. You can look and see who's doing what you're interested in. Do they require the GRE? Talk to their faculty, right? So some of this is iterative. You kind of go back and forth along here. But this is, I encourage you to start early in identifying where you could go because that determines your GRE score. It may shape what you want to do. You run into someone doing something amazing you never knew existed, and you're thinking, why did I want to do this other thing? So you actually could expand your horizons in ways you don't expect. So that kind of identifying a program is a process of searching. And then the application, this is our portal. Most application processes are online now. And it should be straightforward from the department how to get there. But if it's not, Google it. Not all universities have very straightforward things. I don't know if ours has a link to the application page. It may not. But ours is graduateschool.uncc.edu. You should be able to find something similar for almost every school you're looking at. If they don't have an online application, let me know. I'm really curious as to who still does it. But most of them do. So that's going to be a process of gathering information, sending your test scores, and then applying, which will include a couple of things we're going to talk about now. But I will say most applications for master's programs are going to be January, February-ish. Our deadline is March 1st, but there are others that are earlier. So you're really thinking about doing this over the holiday. So that's kind of if you're thinking timeline that way. For fall entry, which most of them are, that's generally when you want to be thinking about it. I don't know of any that are much earlier than December or January.
For masters, a little, yeah.
I think they're a little later like that. So PhDs are earlier. That's one of the differences is you have to start thinking a little earlier for the PhD. So plan ahead. So the different pieces of the application are fairly straightforward, but I just want to go through them a little bit. The faculty are really useful in getting letters of recommendation. In fact, all of your letters of recommendation should come from faculty members. So you should know us, but you should know the people who are in your subfield of interest regularly, and you should ask them early about writing letters. But even before that, remember that timeline was talk to faculty first, they can only write what they know. You have to talk to them, make an impression on them. I've had students who've asked me to write a letter and they've been in a class, I don't remember who they are, and I have to look at their grade to see how well they did, and that makes it hard to write a really good letter. Students who I've talked to, who I've had interactions with, especially those who've worked with me on research projects, I can write pages and pages, well, a couple pages of good stuff that's much more detailed about why they would be a good candidate for a master's program. So you have to put the effort in reaching out, letting the faculty member know you're interested in grad school, and making a good impression. Not just through your coursework, but through interactions. Ask early. We get a lot of requests, so it's good to give them a couple weeks to write a letter. Any less than 2 weeks, I think, is unreasonable. We just get backed up with other stuff, sorry. You're going to hear all kinds of excuses from us, right?
Also ask often.
And often, if they don't respond, it's not because they don't want to write it, they've just gotten bogged down. So always feel like you can do a follow-up email and just say, hey, so I sent you something. I don't know if you saw it. And then they can say no if they don't want to, but it usually is they've just lost track of it. And then the last thing, when you get into your dream program, let us know. It's always good to kind of know what our students are doing. We have a Facebook group, which is a great way to keep track of you guys over time too, so you can tell us where you go, what wonderful things you do, and we can brag back here and say we knew them way back when. Yeah, doing live anthropology. And thank us, sorry. It's always nice to thank people for that. So that's the letters and just kind of basic. It's best to ask someone who's an assistant or an associate professor or a full professor if you know the difference there, just because they tend to have contacts at other universities as well that might be useful. And it's kind of, there's a, I don't know how to say this.
There's a hierarchy,
yeah.
I think is the way you say it.
Yeah, but anyway, so it's just, if you're thinking about letters, if you've got a great professor who you love who's not one of these, that's great. But one of them is, it's probably better to have one that is kind of a permanent tenure track faculty member. That may help you in your applications as well.
And also I would say, if there's somebody in the department who does exactly what you want to do and you don't know them as well, ask them for a letter, but also make sure you get a letter from somebody who knows you really, really well, even if they don't do exactly what you want to do. So that when you apply somewhere, they're like, oh, they're coming from UNC Charlotte. I know Nicole Peterson is there, and she's the premier environmental anthropologist these days. Why don't they have a letter from her if they want to do environmental anthropology?
Yeah, so if you, yeah, exactly. So even if I don't know you well, I can write and say, yeah, they seem fine. But then Sarah can write and say, they are a rock star in the classroom, and I know they're interested in this other topic, and it's such a shame because they would be an awesome bioarchaeologist. So you see how this works, right? So it's meant to be kind of conversational, but it really is this, being strategic. And it sounds like you're using us, but that's okay. That's part of our job. So I'm going to let Sarah talk a little bit about statement of purpose. What you would do.
Yeah. The one other thing, actually, I'm going to go back and say one more thing about letters, which is that if there's somebody here who went to the school that you're applying to, also at least talk with them, if not get a letter from them, because people like to see people that they know, right? So, all right. So your statement of purpose is kind of this weird document that no one is ever really clear on exactly how to write. But basically, it's your chance to tell the people you're applying with what you're interested in, why you're interested in it, how you got there. If you want to start off with a snappy anecdote about your childhood, you can, but it is by no means required. And sometimes detracts from your overall point. So think about that. Yeah. But think about what research you'd like to do, right? This is kind of your chance to dream a little bit, prove that you understand what research means, right? That you know kind of whatever you're applying to, what those people do, right? You want to demonstrate some knowledge, but also kind of what maybe new perspective, if you have an idea of what you'd like to study, you can propose it right then and there. If you're really interested, I'm going to talk about bioarchaeology because that's just what I read. But if you're really interested in trauma in South America, and you're like, and I know Dr. Youngs does that, right? You should talk about trauma in South America in your letter. Having said that, the big difference between a statement of purpose for a master's program and a PhD program is that you don't need to be as specific for a master's program. So prove that you understand what research is, you know how to do research, you understand what a reasonable project would be, but you're not, outlining your whole dissertation in this letter because it's going to be more basic than that. I'll call out which faculty you're interested in working with. That makes it really easy if you haven't done a good job being explicit about which subfield you're interested in. If you name faculty, we can be like, all right, those 3 people are they interested in working on the topics you have suggested? I generally think naming in a department, we have 9 tenure track folks in our department. People naming 3 seems about right to me. If you're like, I have no idea and I don't want to put a third name in because that's like crap, then don't just name somebody to name somebody. But you probably should be able to find 3 people who have similar interests to you. It's also a good rule of thumb because you're going to have 3 people on your committee pretty much anywhere you go. So you've already kind of set yourself up, you've put it in their mind, they can envision you in this program with a committee, right? And that's what you want. The other thing in your statement of purpose that you should address is why are you doing this? Right? Not only that you're interested in research and you want to do these particular things, but why are you getting this master's degree? And why are you getting a master's degree and why that one in particular? So why that school? And that might be where you name the faculty, or if they have a lab facility you're really interested in, or they're closely connected to a museum, right? Those would all be things you want to point out, that you've done your research on the school. Often people talk about their goal after their master's. Are they thinking they want to go on to a PhD program? Are they interested in staying in Charlotte and working for an NGO or something else here in Charlotte? And those would be things that we'll think about when we're accepting students in terms of, is this somebody I can mentor? Can I help them get to their ultimate goal? Finally, I guess the statement of purpose is also your place to justify if you have any low GRE scores or low GPA. We've had candidates who apply, it's like, listen, I started off as a chem major, spent 2 years of my life doing that, and it was a horrible mistake. And then I found anthropology, and now I love it, and that's what I want to do. But you'll see that I got D's for my first 2 years of college, right? And so having a low GPA or having low GRE scores, or if English isn't your first language or something like that, right? Those things won't prevent you from getting into grad school, but you probably do need to address them in your letter. And most anthropologists, other programs might not be as sympathetic, but I'd say most anthropologists are pretty sympathetic to a lot of those low grades in the maths and sciences. Not the sciences, hard sciences. Other things for the statement of purpose I'm forgetting?
Yeah, I guess I would say it's professional. It's a professional communication. So we get some that are very creative, and we appreciate that, but they don't help us understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it really should be focused and professional that way. And there was something else too that I was thinking about that has slipped my mind now.
Have someone else read it, preferably a faculty member. Don't have your best friend read it because they're going to be like, you're lovely, you're great, you know, and you want that person to read it too. But
now that you've cultivated these faculty relationships, use them.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, so you talked to us about, come Dr. Junks, you talked to us about MA programs. Here's my essay. Could you read it? Give me feedback in a couple weeks.
Yeah. I'm a proponent of no longer than 2 pages. We accepted students who wrote 4 pages. So there's no rule. Double-spaced, yeah. That's true. We had one last year that was like 4 single, I think. And I think I got to the 3rd page and I was like, oh my God, right? Like, you're not in yet, right? I don't have to pay attention to this. Edit is important. It doesn't have to be your life's opus, right? Like this is just kind of a professional communication explaining why you're interested and what you could contribute.
It's like a cover letter. You're sending us your transcript, your GRE scores, your letters of recommendation. This is your cover letter explaining to us why we should put these pieces together and see an MA candidate or a year.
It's also a good place to demonstrate that you're at least a somewhat competent writer. All right, so you want to make sure you've had somebody read it for content, but also for grammar. If there are a few typos, that's fine, but trying to avoid that as much as possible is a good plan.
So there's a couple more things I just want to address quickly. Contact and funding. You should contact people at these schools if you're interested in working with them, but you don't have to. Most students we've never heard from before they send their application in, and that's fine. But if you have something particularly you want to work on, and I think Sarah had a couple students talk with her ahead of time, and I think that has an impact positively if you're asking good questions and not just, hey, so tell me about your program. Well, we have a website, right? Here's our website. Come back when you have something else. I'm not that rude, but that's kind of what I'm thinking in my head. But you've had some contact with students coming in here.
Yeah, I've had students email me and just say, I'm an undergrad at ECU and I've worked with this person and I'm interested in these topics. it's always kind of weird because you want to ask a question, but sometimes you're like, what do I ask, right? So asking if they're taking students is always a good idea. They might be on leave in the fall, so they're not accepting any students. They might have too many students already, so they're not taking any students. And also asking, even if you can't really make it work, asking if there's an opportunity to visit, right? This is also someplace, if you're not coming here, someplace that you're going to live for 2 years, it's a good idea to visit before you commit to anywhere. And it gives you a chance to kind of talk to that faculty member in person. It's more common for PhD programs, but it's at least a question you could ask if you felt like you needed an additional question.
And you could ask if they're doing any new research, if they have new projects coming up, and that might help you understand what you might be working on as a master's student. You may have questions. I'm trying to think of other good questions. The kind
Funding.
Funding's the next point. Yeah. So one of the great things about master's programs is that sometimes you can get funding, and sometimes you're a teaching assistant or a research assistant, or sometimes you have a fellowship. But you want to get in on that because it's that they pay you to go to school. So you often get tuition plus stipend, which is nice. So you're being paid to go to school, which is great. But it's also not all that common, especially for master's programs. So you want to find out early when those deadlines are and if you need a separate application. For our program, if you have the application in by March 1st, you're automatically considered for funding. But for other programs, they may have a separate application. So you want to ask about that. And sometimes you have to apply for the FAFSA, the Federal Student Aid application, and things like that.
The other thing I think that I should have mentioned when Nicole referenced me before is it gets faculty excited, right? So like as applications came in, I knew I had emails from 3 or 4 students, so I could be like, ooh, has so-and-so submitted yet? Like, because I'd emailed with them and I was like excited that they were excited to come here. And you want that. You want people who are accepting you to be like psyched about it.
And I will say, so just on the early submission, going back a little bit, we've had students that have gotten hung up in our system, our online system, because they're missing something, and it's kind of annoying. So the earlier you get your applications in, the more that can get resolved before any funding deadlines. So it shouldn't affect you, but unfortunately, we're still waiting on some March 1st deadline stuff to come through, and we're at March 21st. So that's not optimal, but it happens at other places too. So that's another idea for early. So the next slide has a lot of text on it. Don't panic. It's a good table I saw in a psychology journal about, it's called Kisses of Death for the Graduate School Application. So these are things to avoid doing, and you will have access to these slides so you can look at it in detail. But I just want to show you so many ways that you can go wrong. But the main categories are the personal statements, kind of talking about, well, the first one says avoid talking about your mental health, which is just kind of that professional thing, right? Making excessively altruistic statements, things like that. Excessively self-revealing information, just very much keep it professional. Letters of recommendation, also some suggestions about who you should be asking for from, lack of information about the program. If you don't know that they don't have a master's program, you probably don't want to apply to that one, for example. But just not really showing that you know about the program. Poor writing skills, like Dr. Young's talked about, you want to make sure you can show you can write. And then just really missing some attempts to impress. And that having people review it will help you pick up on a lot of these. But I just found, even though it's a lot of information, this is useful as you're going through to make sure you're not using, I am the best student you're ever going to see, ever come through your program. So anyway, that's kind of the sum of what we have in terms of master's programs in general. This is geared towards anthropology since we're anthropologists, but these are the similar kind of processes for any program. So if you're going to something in religious studies or the other social sciences, sociology, they're going to be very similar. If you're applying for natural sciences, it may look somewhat different, but I would say this is going to be helpful for similar kinds of programs across the board. So I do want to talk a little bit about our early entry programs. We do have a program where you can come in before you finish your undergraduate degree. And the big selling point is you get to earn 12 credits towards your graduate degree at undergraduate tuition prices. So it's actually cheaper. Did we not tell you grad school is expensive? Sorry. That's why you want the funding. I guess I should have started with that, right? So for us, you actually can start, you don't need a GRE. You just can test to see if graduate school is right for you. And while we prefer you come in kind of knowing and being sure that this is what you want to do, sometimes it just doesn't work. And we get that, right? Sometimes it's just not what you're looking for and you don't know till you're in it. But being able to take a graduate course or 4 of them can really help with that. It means you have less time to get the GRE. You've taken 12 of 36 credits, or 33 credits, which is really useful. So almost half of the credits you need for the master's degree you can get done beforehand. But we do expect you to have a higher GPA. We think you need to be a strong student as an undergrad to do well as a grad student, just in terms of thinking about it, about what you're going to be getting into. But as Sarah said, if you start off in a major you don't like, or you just have some bad experiences, let us know about that, because we see your transcripts, we see that, their last 2 years they've been stellar in anthropology. They aced the hardest class, and you aced that tough class, so we know you can handle it, or senior seminar, right, things like that. Down here, as I said, you'll see these slides, so you can look at more detail at this. This is the timeline, basically. As with the other timeline, talk to the graduate director, which is me, about early entry, talk to other faculty. And then when you complete 80 credits, that's when you are eligible to apply. So you have to have completed 80 credits to start this. But you'll begin drafting your statement of purpose. You'll start your online application, request transcripts from other schools. You only need 2 letters of recommendation. Our general master's program requires 3. So because you're here as our student, it's that extra knowledge we have, that with the GREs, we figure you don't really need those so much. So you've got 2 letters. And then we encourage you to send them your resume, your statement of purpose and things, so they can really incorporate that into their letter too. That's also another suggestion for letters of recommendation. I usually ask students, if they ask me to write a letter, I say send me your resume and your statement of purpose, because then I can combine what I know about you with what you want to do next, and it helps me write a better letter. Have your recommender read over your statement, and then collect everything by October or March. So I know we're in March, but the deadlines are flexible to some extent. So if you get started now and you want to come in the fall, we can probably still make that work, right? We're still accepting students till mid-July, but it's better to have it earlier than better. And then we ask students, once they apply, to register for undergrad classes as if they're not going to get into the master's program, and then we can always add you to master's classes. Unlike undergrad classes, they don't fill up. So we don't have any problem with getting you guys into the classes you need to take as graduate students. So make sure you've got your undergrad classes set up, but we can then fix that if you get admitted. And then there's some forms and stuff, paperwork once you get in, but that's the basic process. You can do that. So she mentioned 3 classes. So how many classes do you take as an undergrad? 4 or 5? Is that too many?
Like per semester.
Per semester.
Oh yeah, 4 to 5.
4 to 5. So as a grad student, you take one of our former recent graduate student. How many classes do you take a semester as a graduate student?
You're supposed to take 3.
And why do you only take 3?
Because there's a lot of reading.
So we promised they were more intense than undergraduate classes, and that means a lot more reading. So some programs in some courses you do a book a week. Yeah.
So I know that they do this with some of the other masters. Is it geared towards more like evening type classes so you can have a full-time job? And
So we do have students who are part-time students,
right.
And they tend to work part-time jobs or full-time jobs. Our full-time students will do a TA shift for 20 hours a week, and that's kind of the part-time job part of when they're full-time students.
Right.
So if you're working full-time and you take 2 classes a semester instead of 3, that's our part-time, that's generally what people do for part-time. Though sometimes they take 1 class, but it slows you down, right? So instead of 2 years, you do a 3-year program.
Right.
Also, not to mention, you're supposed to be also working on your thesis while you're taking these classes too. So
there's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of things going on.
But we do have classes in the evening.
Yes.
At least some. And they tend to be one day, they're not always, but they tend to be 1 day a week as opposed to multiple days a week.
Nice.
But for 3 hours.
Right.
So I think most of our classes next semester are scheduled at 5 p.m. or later. Methods used to be at 3:30, but I think it's at 5 next semester. And so we tend to have classes start at 5 or later. And part of that is to recognize that people are coming. And 5 o'clock's tough because you're just getting off work and commuting and things. But we try to make it work like that.
Right.
So the credits for the graduate, early graduate program, did they overlap on your undergraduate?
Double count.
So potentially I could lower the amount of classes I take and extend the amount of time that I'm in undergraduate program
And get some master's.
and lower the cost.
So we just changed it this year to 12 hours that can overlap, that can count for both degrees. So if you're 12 hours shy of graduating and you want to do the early entry, those last 12 hours can be your graduate classes. They will also count towards your graduate degree. Now if you only take 6, that's fine too, or 3, or whatever you want to do. But it gives you that flexibility of being able to start and count those towards both degrees.
Yeah,
So our program has 2 tracks right now. Actually, we're
Not
planning
that I
a
didn't
third
like
one.
read my classes.
But when you come in, we often ask you if you'd like to be a general track or an applied track.
Okay.
So the general track is towards that PhD element, and the applied track is towards non-academic positions afterwards.
Okay.
So I and another faculty member work on the applied track, and you've taken applied as an undergrad. We do a lot of projects. That's what you do on your own as a grad student. In class, it's more of a seminar.
Okay.
So you actually cover different readings and talk about kind of how people will approach applied anthropology and things like that. So,
Yeah.
and our third concentration, which we're setting up right now, is our medical anthropology concentration. And that's because we're planning to do, also in the works, a dual MA MPH program. So you get your master's and your master's in public health at the same time, and it's a 3-year program that allows you to get both degrees simultaneously. And so if you're interested in health or medicine, that's a nice way to make that work with our public health program here on campus. So the last slide is just about differences of PhD programs. We do a fall session, that's what that's for. So we often do a session in the fall about that because those deadlines tend to be earlier, November, December. I don't think they're any earlier than that. But so you have to get things a little bit earlier. So if you're thinking about applying for PhD programs, that's what you want to do. Our current master students, so Lennon's applying for PhD programs, and a lot of our other ones are as well. And so that's part of what they're learning too. And it's similar in some ways, the PhD from a master's, but as Sarah mentioned, it's a much more intense project. So you have to kind of propose a kind of more intense project as your statement of purpose, and you're more specialized. So you'll come out of it being an expert. You will as a master, but as a master's student, but even as a PhD, even more of an expert in a small area that maybe no one else in the world really knows as much as you do or your advisor does. It's more of a fit with faculty. You're going to spend 8 years with someone. They better like you and vice versa. Though it is possible to switch. A lot of people some people in my program switch their advisors because personalities sometimes don't work. And that is just a reality of the way it works sometimes. As you're talking about more independent research, and earlier deadlines, and you're going to be asked to do a writing sample, which we don't ask for the master's program. And that, in some senses, because you're going to be writing a much longer, 300 pages in some cases, thesis or dissertation for your PhD program, and we want to know you can write. So for the master's, the statement of purpose gives us a sense of how you write, and that's helpful, and what you've done in courses, things like that. So we don't ask for a writing sample. But for PhD programs, that's probably something they'll do.
And a lot of the time, it can be your master's thesis as your writing sample.
And that's
a good reason
to
to
doing
do
a
a
master's. So that's a lot of information. You may have questions now, you may have questions later. Here's my email. I'm sure Sarah's also happy to talk with you if you have questions about any of this information or just want to sit down and talk. Usually for early entry students, I like to walk them through kind of where they are academically and what they can do over the time. So I'm happy to have a consultation with you about that.